Hello, everyone. I just need to do a couple of things before I get started so that we can also go live on Instagram. It wouldn't let me do it until we went live in the stream. So give me a couple of seconds. And that is it. All right. So let me come on back. All right. Thank you for those who have joined. I am excited about today. And I just want to give some background because exactly 1 week ago, Consumer Reports came out with a video and an article that resulted in my phone blowing up. I had many friends, ex colleagues, family members, strangers come out of the woodwork, and they were asking if it was any validity to the Consumer Reports article and video that came out. So that is what we're going to address today. So in case you don't know me, my name is Dr. Crystal Porter. I'm a hair scientist and owner of Main Insights, a company that conducts research and focuses on the hair needs of people from African descent. And I am also the founder and executive director of the Association of Professional Trichologists. Now, the Our Black Hair Matters movement is designed to elevate the Black hair care industry and empower consumers and hair professionals with education that talks about scientific research and matters that pertain to the unique hair needs in our culture. So welcome to today's Fireside chat, which is different than our lunchtime chat that I'm used to doing. So before I give an overview and bring on my panel, I'd love to see who is out there with us today. So type in your name in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. Put in the number 1 for practitioner, put in number 2 if you are a consumer, and then put number 3 if you are a researcher or scientist. Would love to see you. Also, please like and share if you feel that you have people who can get benefit from this, then please go ahead and like and share. All right. And so in case you are just joining, my name is Dr. Crystal Porter, and I'm a hair scientist, and we will be discussing what many women have been talking about all week. So for years, we have been trusting the hair that we have installed in our heads or in our hair. But what if it's actually putting our health at risk? So 1 week ago exactly, Consumer Reports dropped a bombshell. They said 100% of the synthetic braiding hair that they tested contained carcinogenic materials, which means that it could cause cancer. And that's right. The very products that are marketed mainly to Black folks may be doing more harm than good. So what do we actually do now? Well, tonight I'm joined by a panel of top cosmetic scientists and industry experts to break things down, and we are going to find out if these findings are credible or is it fear-mongering. Can we demand better from the industry? And most importantly, how do we protect ourselves and our communities? All right, so I would like to say hello. I see a lot of names I know. Hello, Joyce Newman. Hello, Diane Johnson and Mia. We can go ahead and bring on our panelists. All right, thank you so much. So I want to do some brief introductions. I do have a landing page for all of their bios, but I'm going to give a brief introduction now. And so we have Dr. Michelle Gaines, and she is an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Spelman College. She received her PhD in materials science and engineering at North Carolina State University and has a rich interdisciplinary research background in polymer materials, almost said science, polymer materials chemistry, nanocomposite interfacial behavior, and biophysics of collective cell behavior. So thank you for coming. And then we have Amber Matthews. She has worked in the cosmetic and consumer packaged goods industry for over 17 years, and she has had a variety of roles across engineering, R&D, and quality. She currently works as a process development engineer for the Honest Company in Los Angeles, California. And then last but not least, we have Kenton Hipsher, and he is the senior sales manager for Lucas Meyer Cosmetics by Clariant, a raw material manufacturer and supplier of innovative active and functional ingredients for the cosmetic and personal care industry. Kenton leads the commercial sale of Lucas Meyer's cosmetics ingredients in the US West. All right, so thanks so much. I wanted to start off by just getting the panel's perspective about what you feel the Consumer Reports article said and what was your main takeaways. So Amber and Kenton, I know you're both muted, but I want to start with you, Kenton. Curious about what you thought of it.
So many thoughts. Immediately, I was skeptical, as any scientist is going to be. And I went straight for the data, skipped through all the rest of the intro stuff and just went straight there. And I feel like they had their heart in the right place, but the study was, the methodology I think was okay at best. There's a few things that I have issues with, but it doesn't look significant to me at all. The motivation behind why specifically braiding hair was a little bit sketchy to me. Like, why not look at wigs as well? Like, why limit yourself just to braiding hair? There was a lot of things that I thought, but the findings are, not significant enough for me to take any action on them. I think if anything, at best, this is like a preliminary study that could lead to additional research, but this isn't anything that I think consumers need to be alarmed about in any form or fashion at all. I mean, think of the years we've been braiding our hair for, and you haven't seen any issues or heard of issues necessarily connected to having your hair braided with synthetic, vegetable, or human hair. So I'm very skeptical at this point, but I'll leave it there and we can dive deeper into it.
All right. Michelle, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I'm in agreement with Kenton, absolutely, that I do think this is a good preliminary study. And I think it's also good for us to start thinking about these types of topics and for testing for them. So I'm glad that there are protocols that are being developed to do so. But I also definitely think that the thing that stood out the most for me was the fact that they were the exposure limits that were measured were based on like maximum exposure limits. And the only way you can get a maximum exposure limit in terms of the coming in contact with any of the materials is if you eat it or ingest it. And that's not what we're going to do with our hair. And that's not what we're going to do with these products. And so I think the main thing to focus on is that this opens up, or at least has us to consider, would be how do these products feel against our skin? Because we know that there are truly issues, which was also mentioned in the article as well. But I think that it's too early to say that this is a major issue because we don't eat our hair. We have it against our skin. So it's my main take.
Amber, you can take yourself off mute.
I kind of agree. Well, not even kind of. I definitely agree with Dr. James as well as Kenton. I think this was a good preliminary study. I think this is a gateway to push scientists in the direction of continuing to study work. But like I am with a lot of other articles that I read, I am very skeptical. And that's probably just my nature as a scientist. The methodology did leave a lot to be desired. Some of my biggest concerns were the number of samples that they tested per brand. So there's no significant statistical data to make a lot of decisions on. It's not to say that the study wasn't important, that the study shouldn't have been done, because a lot more work needs to be done in this area that has not been done for a myriad of reasons. So I hope that this is a stepping stone in the right direction for more scientists to look into that. And I hope that it expands into more than just braiding hair and looks more into how we as consumers are exposed to the product. To Dr. James's point, we don't eat our hair. Kids might put their hair in their mouth, but not really. It's more of a dermal contact. And the study did not speak too much to that. So how are we as readers or scientists supposed to relate the information to how it's actually being used on a day-to-day basis?
All right. So here is my perspective, and I'm gonna go a little bit against the grain. I don't feel that there's a lot of need for alarm. However, I do see that the results were done in a way that is consistent with, I'm looking at the actual test methodology here. I printed it out. And if you go to the Consumer Reports article, you can access that as well. And what they did was they actually used protocols from the EPA. And these are well-established protocols. And the fact that they did the testing in duplicate is consistent with what is done in industry for these types of tests. Now, me personally, when I do data manipulation, I do a lot of rigorous statistical analysis because it's needed. For this was standard for testing and doing qualitative and quantitative analysis. And because that's not like my area of expertise, I did consult to my good friend and ex-colleague and co-author, Dr. Harold Bryant. And he felt that the methodology was very solid. I think some of the questions may come up with how they actually looked or how they prepared the samples or how they purchased the samples. Because if you look at the data, which they also have a link to, which I have a copy of as well, you can see that the data is in duplicate and you do not see the same numbers for each trial that they did. And so my perspective is that because they collected samples from 4 different sources, they used went to Amazon, Ebony Line, Sally's Beauty, and Walmart.com. There are probably inconsistencies in the batches. And because of these inconsistencies, you have a variation in the results that you see. And so from my perspective, I think they did something that is standard within the industry. So I can't say that the video that I did see that someone else has sent me talking about how they felt that it was a high school science, like science fair type of experiment. I don't agree with that. I think that it was something that was based on what is standard. And I think that what they said was that if you have repeated exposure, that you can increase your chances for having adverse reaction. And I can't refute that either. Now, the headlines that we've gotten from the report is, I think on the edge of fear mongering. But I think that collectively, if you consider what they said, I think that it is a good first start and a lot more research does need to be done. So I know that I said something that isn't always consistent with, what my colleagues and peers say, But I think that that's why it's really important for us to do these panel discussions, because it's important for us to get the different perspectives and to also understand how we can move forward from this point. So any comments about my take?
I'm in agreement with it very much. That, you know, in order to do a study, you got to start somewhere. And so it's going to be small first. And so this just happened to really be publicized. But I think anything related to Black hair right now is just such a hot topic that that's why it goes all the way to the top.
Yeah. Now, did any of you have a chance to look at Crystal Thomas's her opinion that she gave from the Lancet? Did any of you get a chance to see that?
Yes.
Because they referenced her work, and she talked about the ingredients that are in hair that I think was probably the catalyst for Consumer Reports to actually do this study. And any thoughts about what she said? And we will have the links later on for the different references that we're talking about.
Yeah, I read it, and I thought it was well written. However, I did want to point out one thing for everyone, because it almost is like the second thing that comes up in the Google search now whenever you do the Google search on this kind of topic. And it is a comment article. It is not a research publication. There are two different types of publications that are typically released. And this one is a commentary, which is the same as kind of like an op-ed in a newsletter or a news report, right? This is her opinion looking at the data that we have available to us today, and she's sharing her opinion, drawing her conclusions based off of that data. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's wrong. It's just not the same as a peer-reviewed publication. So I just wanted to make that point before I jump into it. Now, the big driver for the Consumer Reports study was actually her commentary and her own personal experience in having a negative experience after a braiding event, right? And through that process, this kind of kickstarted her journey, it seems, down this path. And for that, I did find a couple things that I thought were interesting inside of her commentary. In particular, is she does reference what type of hair is typically used, what's the components of the hair, specifically how those things can be considered carcinogenic. And those would be the modacrylate fibers, which is what the synthetic hair is typically made of, or at least the more popular versions. And that's usually some type of vinyl chloride and acronyl something. But thank you. Both of those things are considered class 1 carcinogens. So there's enough data from the International Agency for Research on Cancer to actually assess if this is a potential cancer-causing ingredient. Both of them are, however, those are both connected to inhalation studies. Those are not connected to dermal contact studies, which is probably the largest amount of exposure that you as a consumer are going to have when you're getting your hair braided, is the actual synthetic hair fiber touching your skin. It's not necessarily an inhalation problem. Now, I do understand that the ends of braids are heated to close them, and sometimes they're heated to style them in certain ways. However, most professional braiders or salons that you're in have a very commercially backed ventilation system. And for this very reason, because they know that a part of the process, some things can be released through heat that could be potentially harmful to you. But even without those ventilation systems, the amount that you would need to be exposed to and the duration of time that you would need to be exposed to actually inhale enough to be dangerous is relatively low. So that said, I do find a little bit of an issue with her commentary per se, because it is ringing up really high in the Google search. And as we know, most people don't go past the first page of Google. nonetheless the first thing on Google. However, I do feel like she did a really great job writing it. It is truly backed in science. She does bring up some good points that I think, as we mentioned earlier, is a starting point. And the important thing here is that we're going to have the conversation, and this is not the end of the conversation, right? Every publication that comes out, every topic that gets brought up is not necessarily a right or wrong. It's a starting point for a conversation.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any comments about what Crystal Thomas wrote?
Yes, I'd like to follow up with Kenton's comments, which were, I am in complete agreement, 1,000%. And I'm glad that he mentioned the mode acrylate polymer. Most of the time, and I understand why it would be considered like if you inhale it, it could be an issue. But that's usually true for it in monomer form, as in before it becomes a polymer fiber and strand. So that's in the manufacturing process. And that has nothing to do with once it's a fiber and it's like actually, used as an extension or, in a wig or anything. And so exposure is really only limited, just like he said, in that time that the braids or the extensions are being finished off and dipped in the hot water. Otherwise, you have no risk of exposure at all from that particular material. And then there's so many other materials that we come in contact with in all of our products that are not looked at. And so that's just some thinking that I had. But beyond that, I think it was really well written as well and very well researched. And it definitely sparked the conversation for these reports to be coming out and for these experiments to be done.
Yeah. All right. So my producer, Taria, thank you for bringing up what was asked in the chat. So could you please repeat her name in the chat? I would like to read the publications. So her name is Crystal Thomas, but she spells her name with an H. So Crystal. So Crystal Thomas is her name. I want to ask Michelle, because one of the concerns that Crystal raised was the fact that when you actually make materials, a lot of times, depending upon the quality control that you have when doing the polymerization process, sometimes you have leftover monomer, which is the starting materials. So the vinyl chloride and the acrylonitrile, you have that to start with, and then you put it in a solvent to make the reaction occur. And a lot of times, if the reaction does not go to completion, then you have quality control issues, which can be concerning, especially because in the results they had benzene, which is a class 1 carcinogen, and that is something to be concerned about. And I know sometimes when you open up packages like that, like plastic is wrapped up in more plastic, and you open it up, sometimes you can smell what you're opening. That is an indication of those volatile compounds that are hazardous to your health. And may I also add that that's not just for hair or braiding hair or anything like that. People oftentimes go, "Oh, a new car smell," when you go in. Those are VOCs. Those are those volatile organic compounds that we're talking about that are not good for you.
Absolutely.
So,
the smell of fresh paint.
What'd you say?
The smell of fresh paint.
Exactly. So we're exposed to that all the time. And the problem that I have is when they reached out to some of the manufacturers, and it was laughable. My opinion is that it was laughable in terms of what they said. "Oh, we want you to continue buying." And I was like, wow, that's good for you to say because you want people to continue to spend their money. The issue is until you prove that you have good quality control, I'm sorry, it's problematic because some of those levels were pretty darn high. And in looking at the methodology, I think the levels are valid. I don't think it's anything wrong with the methodology, but you're right, basing it on what you eat probably isn't appropriate. But even if you base it on what you inhale or dermal contact, those numbers were pretty high. And until we have more research, I would actually err on the side of caution and say that for some of those brands, it was just too darn high. And it was obvious that there is no quality control at all. It should not be all over the place like that. So that is concerning, because if you're not taking time to actually test your end product, then what are you also not doing during the process? Because there are some other things like the conditions of your manufacturing plant. There are other things that we need to know about. And I think that because people need to know to limit what they are exposed to, I think it's nothing wrong with them actually saying, hey, we have done testing. And let people make informed decisions. I mean, because you want to know the level that you're exposing yourself to for all the different opportunities that present themselves just living in life. If you're going to be exposed to numerous things, you want to minimize as much as possible.
That's definitely true. And as a chemist, I come in contact with so many chemicals on a regular basis, teaching lab, et cetera. And we have the fume hoods and the capacity to keep ourselves protected. And we wear the PPE, the protective, personal protective equipment necessary to keep ourselves or minimize our exposure. And you're absolutely right. Opening the packaging, all of those smells, or any other consumer products that have a smell to it, that all goes right back to these volatile organic compounds that are coming out. And the acetone was the one that came out the most. And my assumption is that it's used as the substance or the solvent to precipitate out the final product, and basically to get rid of probably anything that didn't react, like the extra monomers, like the acrylonitrile and the other monomer that I can't think of right now.
Vinyl chloride.
I mean, yes, thank you. Vinyl chloride. Yes.
Yep.
So that would be my assumption. And it's true. We should try to minimize ourselves as often as possible. But once it's out of the package and it has time to air, beyond the actual what it's made out of, the coatings that cause so much irritation, we need to figure out what's happening with those. I am so curious, because I saw a comment that said something about dipping it in apple cider vinegar. And I actually tell my students that I suggest to do that, because there's a lot of alkaline components, which would be high in pH, on the hair. And that's often why we feel so irritated. And many of us, I know exactly what it feels like to deal with that irritation. And you want to take your hair out as soon as you put it in, but you just spent hundreds of dollars getting it put in, and pain, and many other things. So, not to dominate the conversation at all, but those are things that are in my mind for sure as things that we want to take a look at.
Right.
To kind of piggyback off of this quality control thing, I also found it laughable in the brand's responses, and I took it as from the standpoint of they didn't do any of the testing that was done on the back end. So of course they're like, oh, well, we didn't see any of it. Well, you didn't see it because maybe you weren't looking for it. And like to Dr. James's point, a lot of the exposure is happening in the manufacturing process. So the people who are making the product, the chemists who are coming up with the formulas to create the product, those people are probably a lot more exposed than the end user. But my hope is that with studies like these, and us as scientists and even the consumer community pushing for additional work to be done. My hope is that brands take it upon themselves to, and you don't have to do the testing in-house, but do the testing externally. Send it somewhere where they have the capacity to do the testing that's required to further ensure to your consumers that, yes, my product is safe and it's backed up with this particular data. And that's something that's done in the personal care industry. It's done in the drug industry. It's done in the pharma industry. It's regulated at some point for a lot of other products, food as well, but not in this type of personal care product.
But you raise a good point, because if they start doing that testing, ultimately it's less money in their pocket.
Of course.
Especially if they have to do it per lot. Well,
yeah, and if you're selling a bag for 99 cents, well, I mean, how much work are you expecting, to be done on the QC side? You don't have the money. You don't have the money for it.
Oh, they have the money for it.
Yeah.
They have the money for it. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm going to say that till later.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know why I should save it till later. So my issue is that you have reports like this, or articles and videos, and people making all these comments, and people are concerned. And because there is lack of research, we know that there's lack of research. And so I'm going to ask Taria to actually pull up the slides that I have, because I did a presentation for an e-summit. It was right before Thanksgiving, so that had to have been November, this past November. And basically, there have been a lot of articles talking about, hair extensions causing irritation. So it's all anecdotal, but that is what leads us to want to study and to actually have a controlled study and different variables that we control to actually answer some of these questions. So if you can go to the next slide, please. All of this came from the actual e-summit. And so what I was really getting at is what Crystal Thomas, so you can see the name here, what she did with her research study in terms of just saying, hey, there's something here. There are a lot of women complaining. She was one of them. And then she actually gave some information about what it is that what could be leading to some of the irritation that people experience. Next slide, please. And so there has been so many articles, especially now. We are like on information overload when it comes to the amount of research out there that shows that there is an impact about our environment, what we do, our lifestyle, that impacts our overall health. And so the more touch points you have, the more exposures you have, the more times you decrease, or you increase, I should say, your risk of actually having it affect you. And the issue is we are not all created equal. So we don't know if we're going to be impacted or not. And it may not be that level of threshold that is known or reported for those exposure limits to be safe. We actually don't know that, because I always get on my soapbox about research. Okay, you can stop the slides. I just wanted to provide some of the research that's been done. But there has not been enough Black women in particular involved in research, because there are things about what we do in our culture. There are things in our environment. We are exposed to a number of different products that other groups are not. And so to say that these limits that have been established for white men, to say that that would be valid for our community, I think is just wrong. I don't believe that's right. And until we start doing more studies, and until some of these manufacturers actually start doing research studies on us, and to justify what they do and what they use based on information for us, then I don't think it's valid. But the problem is we aren't demanding it at all. We are trusting what we use. we aren't telling people we want to see the data. My hashtag is always show me the data. No one is forced to show the data. And that's in this day and age where we have all this information, to me, it makes no sense. Kenton, what do you think?
I agree. This is also a soapbox for me, is trying to get more Black and brown individuals to participate in the testing of products, because on the raw material side of things, I'm doing testing or talking to customers about testing on both sides, for the raw materials as well as for their finished products. And let me tell you, in cosmetics, it is difficult. There is a lot of testing that goes on, which is always surprises me when you look at wigs, weaves, braiding hair, the lack of transparency with the testing, because it's all in the same category at the end of the day. So this is something I always highly encourage people to do, because when I talk to the testing facilities, I ask them, I say, who is your testing panel? Where are you going to source these people from? What is the incentive for them to do the testing? And I explain to them the history that we have with testing and why we're hesitant to participate in these kinds of things. And then they say that, hey, we're trying to source people, but we just can't find people, or people are just not accepting. They're unwilling to participate. And my question to them always is, are you being fully transparent with the methodology, with everything that you're asking of them to do? Is there some type of incentive for them to do that, right? So, and oftentimes it's, it's just a volunteer-based thing. It's like, okay, no one's going to sign up to get tested on if they have no incentive. It's just, there's no benefit for them. So for me, this is a really big issue in our community, and not only just the braiding hair, but also cosmetics as a whole. It's something that we're actively working towards. I know we've made a lot of progress. We now have Black-owned contract manufacturers. We're working on establishing more Black-owned testing facilities, so the Black and brown community feels more confident in that. A lot of the testing that I do for my company is usually based in Brazil, where you have a lot of diversity of individuals that you can get, Black, brown, white, whatever. Also Europe, where you also have a high diversity of people that you can choose from. So that's how we've been going about it. But in America, it is very difficult. And I feel for the testing facilities, but also I understand the consumer perception, because I'm not going to sign up for anything for free. It's just not how it works.
So what I don't understand is, so at one of my old jobs when I was in corporate America, we had absolutely no problem getting Black panelists, none. Now, the incentive was that they were getting paid, or they would get a free service. I mean, there are creative ways that you can actually get people to participate. Me and my research partner, Dr. Jared Hampton Marcel, he and I actually do what's called a citizen science approach. And what that means is you participate in the study and you actually get the findings from the research that you are participating in. And a lot of people want to know about themselves. That's incentive right there. And yeah, it may cost, or it may take a little bit more time, but hire somebody to do it. Because if it's really that important to you as a company, manufacturer, raw material provider, you need to do something. And yes, it may cost a little bit more, but I think it's worth it. And especially when I think there's a lot of mistrust when you have some of these articles come out that is like an expose, letting, or at least making the public aware that there are some concerns.
Also, I think with the work that I've been doing, we don't appreciate enough of the nuance difference between our biochemistry and the morphology of our hair that comes out. Like, there's so much variation that is so very distinct that we don't take the time, not take the time to understand it, but based on what I have learned from industry across, it's such, the curliness of our hair is such a complicated question to answer that they just answer it using straight and wavy hair, and they feel like that covers all the answers. And it really doesn't. That's why we are always right. That's why all of us are chuckling to that, right? That is completely laughable. And so we are, I agree, Crystal, we are not telling our story. And we are not, and we have let others tell it. And it's time for us to tell ours. And that is what my entire research platform is about at Spelman College.
Can you go into that? Because Spelman was mentioned in the article that they wrote. So can you give some background in terms of how you guys are having the impact that's needed, particularly for Black women?
Yes. So one is that, so Spelman College has launched a cosmetic science program. And it's the first of its kind at any type of institution, like we are a small liberal arts school. There's only a handful of these programs in the first place, and there are no graduate programs like that you could go into and have a graduate degree. All the ones, most of them are virtual master's degrees. So there's no PhDs available. So you can already tell that the research on that is pretty small, because a lot of research is done at, universities beyond it, some of the other, beyond industry and national labs. So there's that. Also, we're in the Southeast, the only institution that has a cosmetic science program in the Southeast. So, and it's also for those that don't know what Spelman College is, it's actually the number one historically Black college or university. So it is all Black women that attend, or women of African descent. So in other words, all people with our curly hair that would be walking around with these extensions or with wigs or with added hair or not, natural, any variation of hair that we choose. And so there's a lot of excitement around the program, because now we have a program that's focused on learning about the cosmetics, how cosmetics actually impact us as a community. Because all of these other programs focus on everybody, and everybody is great. There is so much variation in the African diaspora that needs to be explored. And this program is going to provide the means to do that. And so for those that have not checked it out, there's right now we have a cosmetic chemistry concentration as a part of the Department of Chemistry major that you could get. But there's an e-certificate program. So if you're interested in just learning more about cosmetic chemistry, you can get a certificate, and it's just a short, outside of work hours thing that you can do. And there's a lab with it, and it's really exciting, everything that the program is putting together. I mean, we're just getting started, and we are really excited to see where it goes.
Then is that open to men and women, or just women?
Yep, it's open to men and women. Yep.
Great. I love that, because the story is... Go ahead.
Sorry, you just can't be a Spelman student. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. That's not me, so that's all right. But the story is often told about Black women because Black women are the major buyers, right, for hair care, especially here in the States. But I'm always talking to the men out there too, and telling them hey, you can't just use your girl's products, right? You got to understand your own hair too, because your own hair could be very different from your girl's hair. So it's important for you to have a good understanding of what works for you and why that maybe works for you specifically. So I also want to encourage the men to participate in the research, in the studies, as well as the product consumption and testing, to make sure it's a well-rounded approach to everything. I understand the women definitely are holding it down in terms of the purchasing category. We're still working on getting the men off the 7-in-1s, but we're gonna get there. I promise you.
I absolutely agree, especially considering, facial hair. After I gave a talk, there was a Morehouse student that came to me and said, we need to study that too. And I said, there's no better group to study it than our Black men. So I know there's a lot needed in terms of facial hair care for our men. So looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where this industry will be headed in the next 10 years, especially with the onset of a program like Spelman churning out quality scientists who are inherently invested in us because they are us. And I've been in this industry a while, and as I moved up the ranks, I kind of understood, and this is not to justify it, this is just to understand it, why a lot of the research hasn't been done for us. It's because we weren't in the rooms to ask for the research to be done. We weren't in the spaces to demand that we needed the information. So a lot of these brands, a lot of these manufacturers are making products towards the masses, or they've got scientists who don't look like us making products for us. So for instance, if you've got a scientist who has at best wavy hair or a loose curl, they don't understand the challenges of having a kinky, coily, tight texture because that's not them. And we can say as scientists that we develop things without a bias, but we're not. We develop things that we like. We develop things that are of interest to us. And for the most part, we aren't that interesting to them. Our money is interesting to them, but we as a whole are not interesting enough for someone to have done the work. And to the point, like I'm so glad that there will be more scientists that look like us, that have the knowledge that is necessary to drive studies such as this with the synthetic hair, to drive studies for melanated skin, for textured facial hair, the whole gamut. Babies with textures that's going to change 4 times before they hit the age of 1. Like so much is needed, but as the scientific industry becomes more diverse and looks less like white men, then the data will start to appear. The data will come because we will be creating the data that's necessary. We'll continue to push on raw material suppliers such as the company that Kenton works for. Are you doing the research? Are you doing the studies? Oh, you couldn't find people? As big as this world is, you couldn't find a single soul that's diverse. The people are out there. So I understand, but it's not an excuse. The work needs to be done. The work will be done.
Yeah. Now, I want to address some of the questions that are out there in the chat. Actually, there are a lot of comments. Thank you so much. Kiani, excuse me, she says, it's easy to find product distributors, but how do we find the manufacturers of the products? Now, they're supposed to both be on the label, but usually you can usually do a Google search, put the brand in Google, and actually, say who is the manufacturer of, and oftentimes you'll be able to track the manufacturer down that way. I know most the brands that are well known and well funded, they have resources to have like an 800 number or a toll-free number. So that's also an option. But yeah, you should be able to go to a website. Most of them will have the website, and you should be able to go there and ask questions. And if they don't, then you need to make sure that you use products that are transparent enough where they actually provide that information, because there is no reason why they should not include that on the product label.
Yeah, and I want to add a little bit of nuance to that as well, because this is something that's a challenge for everyone. Is yes, you will see the distributor You will see the manufacturer on the product because the manufacturer is usually listed as the brand, or for some of the multinationals, you'll see the manufacturer as the multinationals. So your L'Oreal's, your P&G's, your Estee Lauders, people like that. But if you're curious who made it in terms of like who actually did the formulation and the manufacturing, like the scale up, that's something that's confidential. It is very, very hard to find out that information, even for us, even for people that work in the industry. It's like, it's a guess for me on which actual manufacturer makes the products, because if you weren't aware, a lot of the brands that you're buying from, they don't have manufacturing facilities that they're actually making the products themselves. They work with other businesses called contract manufacturers that actually sometimes create the formula, but more often than not are scaling the formula and manufacturing it. And then the brand is doing the distribution or the selling.
To Kenton's point, it's a lot of nuances, and that part of it is not transparent. So to his point again, sometimes they'll have a formulator in-house. Sometimes the contract manufacturer will have a formulator in-house. Sometimes the brand has their own set of formulators in-house. Sometimes brands will manufacture at several locations depending on their size and their needs. So it can be a little bit, it's a challenge to figure out who made what, but a good place to start is with the brand that's on the label, and each product should have a list of ingredients that are in the product as well.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Now I want to talk about the article that talked about, the plant-based brands out there, because there are some other alternatives. Because while I think there isn't like a lot of concern from us, as I said, I still think that we need to consider individuality in this. I oftentimes have conversations with individuals who actually have a reaction, and I tell people, having a reaction to something you use is a gift. It is a gift because your body is telling you that it is not good. And oftentimes we ignore it. People, have a little pat because, the scalp is irritated, or they get bumps, or the scalp is inflamed. I mean, do not ignore the signs. But if that is something you must have, there are some alternatives. And I want to go over some of the brands that were listed. And I'd be curious if there is anyone in attendance, any viewers who are actually a part of these brands, because I think that is a step in the right direction. But I also want to address, or I want us to talk about whether or not just being plant-based is enough. If you're plant-based, do you even need to test or not? I'm really curious about that. But we have Lillian Augusta Beauty. I'm going in order from what how it was listed in the article. They go by lab. Then we have Nuri brand, and then we have Roan and Rebundo. And so there are different options out there. And the same thing that I have been, talking about in terms of we need to hold the brands accountable. I'm curious about what your thoughts are in terms of doing plant-based or going that route.
Testing still necessary regardless of source. Doesn't matter where the materials come from. Also, how can you confirm that it's plant-based? Am I supposed to just take your word for it that it's plant-based? What did you do between the raw material and you creating your finished good? Did you add any non-plant-based product? Did you add any petroleum-derived ingredients to your process? Are there any incidentals that remain? I think it would be unfair and unwise to say, oh, okay, well, plant-based is better. That's just like saying a vegan diet is better than a carnivore diet or an omnivore diet. One's not necessarily better than the other. But regardless of the raw materials that you use in your product, the testing should be done. So Kenton and I work on the personal care cosmetic side of things. Whether the raw materials are plant-based or petrol-based or they're mineral-based raw materials, the end products are always tested, regardless. So being plant-based doesn't absolve you of needing testing, because that's not to say that a person won't have an adverse reaction to it, because it's still possible regardless of raw material source. Because to Dr. Gaines's point, our physiologies are different. All of our bodies are going to react differently. And just because you might be allergic to the plant that it was made from, who knows? You don't know if you don't do any testing.
Oh, you have a point there. It's so funny because a lot of people just feel because it's natural that it's going to be good. And I see that there are people allergic to natural things all the time. You just have to be really careful. But I think at least the kudos that I have to give to the brands who went that route or are going that route is that at least they are conscious about the fact that there is a need for an alternative. Yeah. So that is a step in the right direction, but I'm glad that you said that it needs to be more than just that.
Yeah. And we're taking steps in the right direction, right? We take steps in the right direction on a lot of actions every day, but that doesn't mean a step in the right direction is enough. It needs to be a lot of steps in the right direction, but we're off to a good start. Because 5 years ago, this alternative did not exist. You had synthetic and you had more expensive human hair options, or a blend somewhere in between if you were lucky. So we've got an alternative. Great. But that alternative is also new. And we don't know how people will react to that alternative. So, start the testing now if you can.
So Amy Kelly says, would there be less long-term effects from the plant-based alternative?
To be determined by the
testing. I think that's speculative. Yes, do the testing. Be unbiased when analyzing the results, and let the data speak for itself. Data doesn't lie.
Yeah, but many people think that natural and plant-based is, like I said, it's a step in the right direction. More steps. So yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Could you just say it one more time, that natural does not equal safe and it does not equal better? If you could just say that one more time.
One more time.
I feel like maybe it'll hit one more time,
Natural doesn't necessarily mean better. There are synthetic options, and aside from hair, there are synthetic options out there that have been tested that are as effective or more effective than the same raw material that's sourced from a natural source.
Yeah.
Now, Amber, you said that you have synthetic hair that's cheaper, but then you did hint on the fact that there are, human hair, and it just takes me back to the days at Chicago State University before COVID, when there were students similar to what's going on at Spelman right now. They were very, very interested in hair science. And so me and Dr. Valerie Goss and my research partner, Dr. Jared Hapman Marcel, we all would have them do hair science. And one of the studies that was done by Deshawn Chenault, she's married now. Sorry, Deshawn, I don't know your married name, but she did research that she presented at our Save Our Scalp symposium that we had in 2019. And she showed the actual data that when you test hair that says it's 100% human hair, that is not 100% human hair. And you're paying money for that. And sometimes it's blended, but sometimes there's no human hair in there. And she showed these results. And so we are just being taken advantage of.
Yes.
And going to the point that you made in terms of testing, if we had some standards in testing, it would be great. And so this kind of gets to the last thing that I want to talk about, and that is, we oftentimes say that products need to be regulated. And I have mixed feelings about that, because I am not convinced that there are enough people who understand. I mean, we already have people in charge who don't consider us and our culture and our environment in the studies anyway. So when you have these regulations, are the regulations going to be based on our needs? Probably not. And so I'm curious about your thoughts in terms of regulatory bodies that may assist in this, because like I said, I already gave the example of sometimes you're buying hair and it's not even 100% human hair. And so what are your thoughts?
So historically, regulation has come from a result of many adverse events, or really critical adverse events. The FDA's Drug and Cosmetic Act of like 1936 was a result of many adverse events that happened in the community, to the point that the federal government was like, okay, let's try to regulate this industry in some form or fashion. I think that regulation would be helpful from a point of regulating like levels of chemicals, regulating the fact that testing needs to be done, regulating the types of ingredients that could be added. Personal care products, cosmetics are regulated, but there's a lot of gray area in the field as well. That leaves room for interpretation, leaves room for people to do not so great things. But it's still regulated nonetheless, and it's a start. If it were, I don't want to say as simple as, but even if there were some regulations that were taken from already existing industries such as personal care, cosmetics, and then applied to hair, that's a useful start. I think it would also be useful to have people on these types of initial regulatory bodies be people who are actual consumers. Because to your point, Dr. Porter, what's the point of regulating something when you know nothing about it? You're not a user. Why would I, for instance, regulate a product that is geared towards men? I'm not a man. I mean, I know men, just like, people know us, but the ins and outs of being a man, that's not my forte. I have to rely on someone else to give me background knowledge that I wouldn't necessarily be privy to. So I think that it's important that the scientists who will help in regulation look like the consumer.
I definitely agree. I think also what it's like, there's two fronts that are coming together. There's the regulation, but then there's also the fact that historically there was no regulation, and there were products that were created for us, sometimes intentionally poorly made, or additives that were intentionally very dangerous for us without our knowledge, because of historical, events. We'll just leave it at that. But so there's that. And then there's, like, for example, relaxers that were just talked about, but in the New York Times, like, those have been on the shelf forever. And it's been the society standard in the past to use them. But now people are realizing how dangerous they've been for our bodies for so long, to have that type of exposure all that time. So now they're thinking, well, we should regulate those, which sounds like a great idea. But it's just those two fronts coming together is going to cause more complication, or I could see how complication could arise from that.
Yeah.
But is something that needs to be considered. And I agree. It needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Something is better than nothing right now. And right now we have a bunch of nothing. It's the wild, wild west.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really
Now, I want to have a point of clarification because Dr. Gaines, I think you said that relaxers were going to be regulated. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it's incredible that no one has really talked about it. But the regulation was actually for formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is in hair straighteners. And while a relaxer is a form of hair straightening, it isn't the formaldehyde based. And so the regulation is for the formaldehyde straighteners and not necessarily for relaxers, because to my knowledge, there is no relaxer that actually has formaldehyde in it because it's not needed. But people are getting it interchanged and confused. So I just wanted to have that point of clarification.
I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that. And to your point, there are products that they're taking the formaldehyde out for that reason, which is good. I think we've been hearing about in the news as well.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that these regulations are they absolutely have to be scientifically based. Because, like, to your point, this can get really messy really quickly. And it can be a lot of weird interpretation. Like, back to the formaldehyde topic. What if there's a formaldehyde donor in there in the form of a preservative? Like, it can get really tricky. And it'll be important to ensure that these regulations are scientifically based, not based on fear mongering, not based on mom blogs, not based on the internet, but are backed in science with reliable, peer-reviewed data.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we end in giving like any tips. What should people be mindful for or mindful of? What are your thoughts in terms of takeaways from the article and how you feel that people should proceed?
Great article, but it's a start. And remember, it's a start. Like I said, I hope that there are some scientists out there who will dig deeper into their research. My hope is that this research gets published and leads to better regulation and ultimately better protection for us, because we'll have a stronger presence in this scientific market. And if it's not there, create the lane, because we are powerful enough. Our dollars are that important, and we should treat them as such. Do the work for us to protect us, to ensure that we're here long term, and not just, living by the beauty standard or by the standard of beauty is pain. It shouldn't be painful. We shouldn't be, harming ourselves with trying to beautify our hair or straighten our hair or whatever it is by our regular, beauty standards. We already know that this industry isn't necessarily looking out for us, but we can look out for ourselves.
Michelle?
I think, Amber, you said it just so well. I completely agree, 100%. Like, does that mean that, you don't get your protective style done, in a week? I think that you still do, but you're just mindful, and you're just mindful about how things are affecting you as you come in contact with things and with any other product that you use. And you pick it up and you take a look at the label. And we also have our kids to think about. And I mean, we're talking about hair extensions, but we're not talking about eyelash extensions, for example. That's probably a whole other discussion. So, there's a lot of consumer products that are marketed towards us, and just being mindful, I think, is all that we need.
Yeah.
And Kenton?
I wrote a list because I had a feeling there was going to be a lot of things I wanted to share. I didn't have the time to make an infographic, but I'll do that at some point. But I'm just going to hit like these 5 key points that I feel like will help a lot of people in regards to this. But before I jump on the tips, just to talk about the article, one, I agree with everyone. I think it was well done. I do think it's a great start. There needs to be more. The only thing I wish that Consumer Reports would have done is they would have tried to control the headlines a little bit more, because they just seemed like they were running with it. And I feel like as the author of such work, you should be the one dictating the narrative. And I think they let that get a little out of hand, and that caused a lot of hysteria. I know, Crystal, you said your phone was blowing up. My phone was blowing up. And I didn't really have much to tell people. So I get it. But for the tips, the first one, as we said earlier, be skeptical. It is okay to be skeptical. You should be skeptical about most things. Do your Google searches, use ChatGPT, have a conversation with them to really understand what it is that you're reading, what it is that you're seeing, what's being presented to you. Ask yourself not only why it's being presented to me, but who is presenting this to me, right? Is this a person of credible relevance to what I'm looking at? Also ask yourself, how is this being presented to me? How was this research done? These are things that will help check a few boxes for you of, okay, I'm getting a little bit more reassured that this is solid, credible information. The second thing is, when it comes to the topics like these, always consider the exposure. Consider the exposure duration, the amount of exposure, and ultimately the route of exposure, right? We brought this up with the oral benchmark versus the topical benchmark, which is 2 completely different things. The third thing is look at the history, right? If we look at the history of women that have had synthetic braids in their hair, we haven't seen a lot of skin cancer in places where contact with the hair and the skin is being met. So we don't see that. Skin cancer is, in Black women in particular, is not one of the top 3 highest rated cancers historically. So that should give you some indication that while this may be a good start, it may not be 100% accurate to today's landscape. The fourth thing is think about the significance and the relevance of the data, please. If you don't see statistical significance, don't throw it completely out the window, but just take it with a grain of salt, okay? Because that is a really big thing for us as scientists. This is why we do everything in triplicates usually, and why we really lean hard into giving you that little asterisk on your bottle to tell you that it's statistically significant. And the last thing I wanted to do was just give you some resources. I know Amber also does a lot of outreach. We are happy to discuss. I mean, Dr. Gaines' whole course on this. So, there's all the information there. Crystal's made herself more than available. But a few people that I want to shout out that actually have discussed this online and discussed a lot of beauty and personal care topics broadly. That's Javon Ford, the first person. Second person, Isaac, that's Sci as in science and Isaac combined. The Eco Well podcast, it's probably the #1 podcast for beauty and personal care conversations right now, as well as Lab Muffin Beauty Science. She's been on YouTube doing this for years. She's very credible. She knows her stuff. And they're all working together to try to give us the information that we need to make sure we're making confident decisions with our purchases. So those are the 5 tips I'm going to leave you with. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. You can reach out to me at any time. I'm always open to conversation.
Thank you. That was awesome. I'm glad that you were able to give the shout outs to the scientists that are credible. Now, I have to say that based on our experiences, we have different perspectives based on our experiences. But it does not mean that you should not take into consideration what is said just because it may be different than what you may think it should be. Because I was once on a panel discussion, and it was a comment said that, oh, look at the scientists arguing. They're not even agreeing. And it wasn't necessarily that we weren't agreeing, we just had different perspectives to speak from. And that is why it's really important for us to continue to have this group dialogue, because diversity in thought and experiences matter, just like our Black hair matters. And so the thing that I want to say is we should be making demands. We should not be asking. We should be demanding. We should go on the brand's social media pages where they are definitely going to see it along with others. And we should actually say, this is what we demand. We demand that you do either third-party testing, or you either show data that justifies what it is that you're trying to say is best. That is something that's on us. It's not on, well, it should be on the brands, but we know that they don't always adhere to that. So we need to make informed decisions based on having data. And then, as Kenton was saying, you know, he talks about participating in studies. There is no way that we can make advancements as scientists without your help. And so if there is an opportunity for you to be in a study with someone you know, like, and trust, then definitely consider being in studies, because that is the one way that we can get the data to show you that it is actually beneficial to you and you have been considered. So that is my 2 cents. I think Kenton and Amber and Dr. Gaines did a great job summarizing everything, but I wanted to do that. But thank you so much to everybody who participated. The Curl Conqueror actually put down your 5 points, Kenton. So that was awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Krista, Joyce, Jaxie, you know, thank you so much. Tracy, Philip, Sarah, Naturality. Yeah, it's so many of you. Amy had comments. Patricia, I could go on and on. I am happy that we've had so many people and the level of engagement. If you have any follow-up questions, just as Kenton said, feel free to reach out. And until next time, take care and love your hair. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.